We are in our series in the book of Ruth. And it's a mini-series only because the book of Ruth is a mini-book. And yet it is packed with so much excitement and truth, and it's a joy to be exploring it together today. As we jump into the Word, let's just open with some prayer. God, thank you so much for the hope that we see in the lives of Ruth and Boaz. God, thank you for how you are always moving and working in the lives of those that are faithful to you. God, how you're orchestrating and how you are providing and how you're protecting and how you're leading and how you're guiding. Even when we can't see it, God, you are on the move and you are sovereign and you are above all and before all. God, I ask that you would open our hearts and minds this morning that we might see Jesus more and more clearly. God, would we discover the wonders of your love afresh and anew today. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen. So Seth has been walking through chapter 1. Today we're going to jump into Ruth chapter 2. And just by way of review, we know that the book of Ruth was written during the time of the Judges, which for the most part is a lawless time in history where every man did what was right in his own eyes. It was very bleak and very dismal. If you just looked at it from a 30,000-foot view, you would see darkness kind of covering the face of the people of Israel, which is what makes the book of Ruth stand out so brightly. When you zoom into the individual people of Boaz and Ruth, their characters, their integrity, their humility, their righteousness shines brightly against the darkness of the culture around them. And when you zoom in to the lives of Ruth and Boaz, you should see and get an ever awakening and growing hope within you that despite what's going on as a whole, despite what's taking place in culture as a whole, you zoom into the lives of these two people and you can very clearly see the hand of God working in and through his people. And it can get discouraging when you look at things as a whole, when you back up and you have the 30,000-foot overview and you hear the news reports and you see what's taking place. It can be discouraging that it seems like darkness is taking over the land. But when you look at the lives of these individuals, we get a glimpse, we get a taste of hope that God is moving, that God is working, and that he is coming to the rescue of those who are crying out to him. And we finished up chapter 1 with the kind of the picture of Naomi being full of lament, right? She comes back to Bethlehem and she says, hey, don't call me Naomi, don't call me pleasant, call me Mara, call me bitterness, for the Almighty has dealt harshly with me. You see, Naomi had this perspective, this mindset that she left full and she was returning empty, and her life was filled with lament and sorrow and death and grief and loss. And so she was coming back to Bethlehem, in her perspective, empty. And yet the reader understands and sees the hand of God working. And we know just even at the end of chapter 1, we can see that the hand of God has been working, that Bethlehem has grain once again, that God has ended the famine, and he is providing for his people. And this is how we start in chapter 2, with hope. Now, Naomi still can't see it, but there is a pivotal moment in Naomi's life in chapter 2 that changes her perspective, a 180-degree turn. And the reader gets to find out what that is before Naomi is even aware. It says in chapter 2, verse 1, now Naomi had a relative. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Take heart, Naomi, your Redeemer lives. You see, she doesn't know it yet, but we know and we recognize that the very existence of this man named Boaz should fill Naomi with hope. Because though Naomi didn't realize it, there is somebody in Bethlehem that Naomi can belong to, that can rescue her, that can lift her up out of her despair and her gloom. Take heart, Naomi. Your Redeemer lives. Your Redeemer lives. Boaz is a blood relative. He is in the right family line to provide for Naomi and Ruth. And we know that Naomi didn't realize this because she said, hey, Orpah and Ruth, don't come home with me. There's no hope. There's no one for me to marry, and even if there was someone for me to marry, I'm too old and I can't have kids that are going to be in a place where they can marry you when you're of any childbearing use. So she was of the mindset that she was hopeless. There is no one for me to marry. There is no one for you to marry. But this one fact, this one reality, the one thing that changes everything, church, is that her Redeemer lives. And redemption was the means by which a lost family member or a destitute family member was restored to a place of security and safety and belonging within the kinsman circle. Without a Redeemer, Ruth and Naomi have no way of provision or protection. They really have no one to belong to. And not only do we read in verse 1 that there is a Redeemer who lives, he is a worthy man. He is worthy. And this phrase is very full. It's packed with meaning. He is a man of great wealth and a great power and great influence. He is a man who possesses the finest of character qualities. He is a man that it could be said who is mighty in valor. He is powerful. He's a purveyor of value and wealth and force. Perhaps his strong character was a result of him enduring and going through this time of famine, that he stayed in Bethlehem and endured and pressed into. Notice that we have a contrast here between the person Naomi and the person Boaz. Naomi left Bethlehem full and returns empty. Boaz stayed in the emptiness of the famine, and yet he comes out on the other side with great wealth in both character and resources. And we know that he has fields, and he has influence, and he has servants that are working with him and for him. And Boaz is not just a relative, but he is a worthy man in the clan. So we see right out of the gate, verse 1 of chapter 2, that there is a man who is a relative in the right bloodline, and there is a man who is able. He has the resources to provide for and to protect Ruth and Naomi. The reality that Boaz existed is a life changer for Naomi. And yet, Naomi hasn't been awakened to his existence yet. Not until the end of chapter 2. So we start with Naomi's gloom and doom. She says, oh, the hand of the Lord is against me. But we wrap up at the end of chapter 2 seeing Naomi burst forth with praise. For the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. So let's read verses 1 through 7. We'll read verses 8 through 13 to follow, and then I'll summarize the end of the chapter. We'll just make some observations as we make our way through the text together. Verse 1 through 7, Ruth chapter 2. Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. And as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter." So here we have Boaz. He comes into his harvest fields, and he takes notice. He takes notice of Ruth. And his first concern, his first question is, well, who does she belong to? And you see, there's a special soft spot in Boaz's heart, in his life. He is filled with compassion. Perhaps it's because his own mother was an outsider and a foreigner. His mother, Rahab, as you know, was a prostitute in the town of Jericho. So Boaz grows up with a foreign woman who has come to Israel for protection and for rescue. And he has in his heart a soft place, a place of compassion, and he wants to know, who does that woman belong to? Who is looking out for her? Who is protecting her? Who is watching out for her interest? Who is providing for that woman? And Boaz has wealth and influence. He greets his servants. Did you notice how he greeted his servants? He arrives at the office on Monday morning, if you will, and he sees his employees scattered about doing their business. And the first thing he says to them is, "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you." How would you like to work for somebody whose heart was so outward focused? And do you notice the relationship he has with his servants? Their response to him is, "The Lord be with you, boss man." You see, his influence trickled down into those people that worked for him. And it's said that righteous integrity in the workplace begins with looking for ways to protect and to bless the employees under your care. See, we just get a little bit of a glimpse into the heart and the mind of Boaz just by the way he interacts with his servants, by the way he seeks to bless those that are working with him. It is proof or evidence or a glimpse that Boaz is a man that possesses the finest of qualities. He is always looking to bless others. He's a man of influence and wealth and resource, but what is he doing with his influence, his wealth, and his resource? He's concerned about those under his charge. And who does Ruth belong to? Because if she doesn't belong to anyone, and she's come into my field, Boaz says, then I want to make sure she gets taken care of, and that she is blessed. We also, in these verses, get a glimpse into the heart and the mind and the character of Ruth. And if you set Ruth and Boaz next to each other, they're by worldly appearances entirely different people. You have one man of great wealth and resource and influence, and you have a foreign widow who's destitute. But you see, their hearts and their characters are very similar. They are both looking to serve and to bless, and they're both looking out for the interest of others. They're looking to take care of those who are in need. So God is working in and through these two very different people in the eyes of the world, but he's working in and through their noble character and their righteous integrity to bring about change for the world. We see here that Ruth takes initiative. She has every reason in the world to sit in a puddle of tears and do nothing. And yet what does she do? She takes initiative. She doesn't even wait for Naomi to say, "Hey, Ruth, could you go get us some food? You're the young one." She jumps up and she says, "Hey, Naomi, I'm going to go glean." She takes initiative. We see that she is humble and gracious. When she arrives in the field, she does not storm in and take the gleaning position by right, but she comes and she humbly asks, "Hey, can I please have the leftovers? can I please have what your guys drop? Can I pick up what's sitting on the ground? And this stands out to the man in charge, because that's the first thing he tells Boaz when Boaz asks about Ruth, that she asked permission. And it reminds me of Matthew 17, when you have the woman who comes, and the daughter is demon-possessed, and she comes to Jesus, and she begs Jesus for help, but she's an outsider, she's a foreigner, she's a Gentile, she's not a Jew. And Jesus says, it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus commends her for her faith and heals her daughter instantly. And I think that this is the same heart and the same mind and the same posture of humility that Ruth assumes as she comes into Boaz's field and says, can I please just have the leftovers? Can I take the leftovers? We know that she is a hard worker. She works all the way up until the arrival of Boaz, only taking one small break. She didn't even realize that she was under such close inspection. And then she works beyond lunch. And then once she has gathered her 5 gallons of barley, she beats it out, she carries it home, and she gives it to Naomi. She's a hard worker. And do you recognize that the integrity and the humility and the graciousness and the character of both Ruth and Boaz shines so incredibly brightly against the backdrop where everyone else is living according to their own rules and their own way, and they're doing what they think is, or they say is right. And here you have two people that are seeking to live from a posture of humility and looking out for others, and their character stands out so brightly in the backdrop of lawlessness. Let's read verses 8 through 13 and make a few observations. Then Boaz said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then Ruth fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me? I am a foreigner. But Boaz answered, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. And how you left your father, you left your mother and your native land, and you came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and you have spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. We see in this passage the blessings and the provisions of Boaz. He offers her protection. Hey, men, don't touch her. Don't bother her. Watch out for her. Look after her. He says, don't go into someone else's field. You're safe in my field. Stay here. We see that he gives her access to water. Hey, you didn't earn this water. You didn't draw this water. This water wasn't here for you, but you've come under my protection. And when you're thirsty, come and drink. Does that sound familiar? All who are thirsty, come and drink. And he will provide water for those who come to him that are thirsty. God is painting a picture, isn't he, of the person and the work of Jesus Christ. Boaz goes above and beyond the law. We know from Deuteronomy 24:19 that those that are destitute and the widows and the foreigners were allowed to glean. But Boaz isn't interested in just letting Ruth glean the leftovers. We know that he is going above and beyond what he is required to do, because he has an outward focus, and he's seeking to bless even the foreigners in the land. Provisions continue in verses 14 through 16 with an invitation to come to the table. Come to the table. Come and eat with me. Come and break bread with me. Come and dip your bread into the cup with me. This is a place of intimacy. This is not a place for a widow, a foreigner, an enemy. And yet Boaz is inviting Ruth to come into the table, a place of intimacy and relationship. Eat until you're satisfied. Take your fill. And he allows her to take leftovers home for Naomi. And then he instructs his workers. He said, hey, she's going to glean in the field behind you, but I don't just want her to get the leftovers. Let's do something cool here. Let's bless her above and beyond what we're required to do. So I want you to take some of the good stuff out of your bag and drop it for her. This is Boaz. His kindness continues, and Ruth reaps the blessing and the benefit and the reward. And what is Ruth's response? But once again, true humility as she sees the abundance that's being poured out upon her and before her. She says in verse 10, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? Why have I received this grace from you? Why am I getting this gift from you? Why are you protecting me, providing for me, blessing me? Why are you going above and beyond? I don't deserve a seat at the table with the master, but you have invited me to come to the table and to break bread. Why are you inviting me? Why are you giving me this water that I don't deserve and I haven't drawn? Do you realize that Ruth never asks why when the bad things happen in life? She had a lot of reason to ask why. But she comes and she recognizes that the good things that are coming her way, it's not because she's earned it or deserved it. And she comes in a posture of humility as she receives the blessing. I think this is a good lesson for me. Because it's easy to ask why when bad things happen, isn't it? And it's easy to assume that we deserve it when the good things happen. Ruth could have, many of us would have, I probably would have, taken the mindset of, well, it's about time someone noticed me. I mean, have you seen all the good, have you seen what I left behind? Have you seen what I've done for Naomi? Finally, someone's looking out for me. But she comes in a posture of humility, recognizing that the gifts that she's been given is nothing that she necessarily deserves. She's not expecting such kindness. She's not expecting such blessing, and she asks for the leftovers, and she gets much, much more. And Boaz answers her question. In verse 11, he says, all that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me. It's a small town, Augusta County. And how you left your father and your mother and your native land, and how you came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. You see, I don't think it's Ruth's actions that earned her this favor or this grace, but rather it's her actions that seem to be an evidence that she has given herself to the protection of God, that she has come to the God of Israel for protection and provision. She has turned her back on that which was comfortable and safe because she got a taste of the true God when she was with Naomi, and she turned her back on all that she once knew, and she sought God of Israel for her protection and her provision. And there's a place of freedom that Ruth experiences when she's under the wings of the God of Israel. And that place of freedom allows her to move about in ways that would be frightening and unknown. But she is safe under his wings. Picture the eagle with her wings spread wide. Gather the little eaglets to come close for safety. McLaren says of this image that the mother eagle with her wing over her eaglets is a wonderful symbol of both the union, or of both power and gentleness. Power to protect, right, and the gentleness to provide and to care for and to love. Oftentimes you see a deity depicted in other cultures of the time with their wings spread wide over the king, depicting protection and care. You see that that's God's heart for his people. God's heart for all people is that they would come under the shadow of his wings, that they would position themselves where he is their refuge and he is their provision and he is their strength. And we know that that was Jesus' heart as he looked out over the city of Jerusalem, and he weeps because they did not come under the shadow of his wings. In Matthew 23, oh, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and yet you were not willing. And here we see in Ruth a Moabite woman who has come under the shelter of the wings of the Most High God. And she is experiencing that freedom and protection and provision. Charles Spurgeon points out that in order to be under his wings, a companion has to be very close. You have to be very close with God to come under his wings. That's the invitation for us this morning, church. Would you come? Would you come to the table that Jesus, our Redeemer, is inviting you to? A place of intimacy and relationship. Would you come under the wings of his protection? Would you, like Ruth, turn from your old lives and seek refuge under the shadow of the Most High? And we see Ruth's response to the God of Israel as she's been introduced. As we finish up the chapter, Ruth takes home all of this grain. Naomi's eyes pop out of her head when she sees the abundance that has come home to her. And remember, up until this point, Naomi is still in the dark. Her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I worked is Boaz." And I imagine that in that moment, there is a hope that rises up within Naomi that she hadn't experienced in over 10 years. Because her Redeemer lives, church. And she says, that man is a close relative of ours. He's one of our Redeemers. And she recognizes in that moment that there is somebody that she can belong to, that can protect them and that can provide for them. And she has a living hope. We know that God has been at work the whole time, orchestrating, working in hearts and minds of people, providing for. But Naomi is finally having her eyes open to that reality. In many ways, Naomi is like a female Job. Lots of loss and suffering and grief. Job stood anchored during his moments of loss. And this is what he says. He says, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand upon the earth." Do you see, church, that changes everything for us? That our Redeemer lives. And if you don't recognize that this morning, if you're lost in trial, if you're lost in famine, if you're lost in difficulty or suffering or grief or loss, would you cry out to God and have him open your eyes that you may see that your Redeemer lives and that he has come and that he has finished his work so that he can rescue you, that he can provide for you, that he can protect you. Our Redeemer lives, church. We should be a people of great hope against the backdrop of the darkness in this world and this culture. We should be a people that beam with hope because our Redeemer lives. He lives, church, and he's inviting you, strangers and aliens, enemies of God. He's inviting you into a place of intimacy. He says, "Come to the table. Come to the table." Would you come to the table, and would you eat of would you drink of my drink? I am the living water. Come. Those who are thirsty, come. I will satisfy you. I will provide for you. I will fill you. Would you come? Paul encourages the church at Ephesus to remember that they were at one time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, stranger to the promises of God, without hope and without God in the world. You realize that's us. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. And it's not about anything that we have done to earn it or anything that we haven't done. It's a free gift. He's come to redeem us and to rescue us and to provide out of the abundance of his storehouses, church. Our Redeemer